Hello, I'm Dan Ashley, and thank you for joining us. As you know, the economy is still sputtering. We are a nation struggling to pull itself out of the worst recession since the stock market crash of 1929 and the Great Depression that followed. But what can be done to fix our broken economy? And can the solutions be found from among all of us? We've pulled together everyday people in the Bay Area and some of the leading economists to hear what they have to say on this subject. And tonight we take you down the road to recovery with solutions from the 99%.
It is the longest economic downturn since the Great Depression, a recession that began just before Christmas in December 2007. Millions lost their jobs. Companies lost billions. The housing market collapsed.
The house is worth 60 to 50% less.
And banks failed.
Now I'm going to be out, this money.
This is my retirement.
Economists call it the Great Recession because it wreaked havoc on financial markets and consumer spending domestically and brought economies around the globe to their knees. It has been a slow road to recovery. The federal government says the U.S. economy grew just 2.5% from June through September. Consumer confidence in October fell to its lowest level since the height of the recession in 2009, but shot up slightly in November. Unemployment sits at 8.6% nationally. The state unemployment rate hovers around 11%, though the Bay Area as a whole is doing slightly better, roughly 9%. Home prices are flat. Home values in the Bay Area have plummeted more than 45% since mid-2007. The median home price in the Bay Area in 2007 was $665,000. In October, it was down to $365,000. Though the recession technically ended in the summer of 2009, people are fed up.
People are falling in between the cracks.
Taking to the streets and holding vigils and occupying public spaces from the Bay Area to Wall Street. Their slogan? We are the 99%! We are the 99%, referring to the disparity in income between the wealthiest Americans and everyone else. The Congressional Budget Office reports that between 1979 and 2007, the income of the nation's richest 1% grew by an average of 275%. During that same period, the American middle class saw their income grow by just 40%. So when the economy took a nosedive, those who saw their income grow the least suffered the most.
We want to talk about the economy and what you think is going on with the economy, what you think can be done to improve our economy. And let me start with just a general question, show of hands. How many of you are deeply concerned about the state of the economy? Raise your hands.
We recruited this group from Facebook and Twitter to come to our studios and share their thoughts. They are your neighbors and friends, workers and entrepreneurs, retired and just getting started. They are all experiencing the economic downturn in their own way.
As a union leader of a small union in the Bay Area, we have facing tough negotiations with corporations that they want to reduce their wages of our members, reduce their hours, and also making them paying more for the insurance premiums.
There's so much that we have that we don't take advantage of. I think American people should wake up and seek the opportunity that is present and not seek the opportunity that is not available.
Some people see this economic downturn as a cyclical event.
I also believe that in life we go through cycles where economies, and especially worldwide, go through devastation and then they come back up.
But not everyone agrees that this downturn is part of some kind of cycle.
It's much, much bigger than your cycle. And saying it's a force of nature is ignoring the fact that so many actors have been working very hard to make it go one way or the other. And I'd say the main actors are the, again, not to beat up on the 1%, but I enjoy it. And yeah, they're
Take your shot, Mike.
They're the shakers and the movers. I mean, so the buck stops there.
A recent USA Today Gallup poll found 87% of Americans blame lawmakers in Washington for the slow recovery of the economy. So did most of this group.
How many of you are blame our leadership, lawmakers in Washington and maybe even at the state level, for the fix that we're in, for the boat that we're in? Raise your hands.
Yeah, not to be too partisan, but I am concerned with, particularly in Congress, there seems to be a tone coming from the Republican side that says we'll stand in the way of anything that's part and parcel of the Obama agenda.
I believe in our leadership that we have as far as in the government. So really, this is a good time for us to actually spearhead a new economic system for this country and for some of the younger generations to take control.
My number one priority right now is doing everything that I can every single day to create jobs faster and to provide more security for middle-class families and those trying to get into the middle class.
The likelihood that he'll get things in bits and pieces passed is very close to zero, which I think is good that it's close to zero, because I don't think he's advocating things that would really help the economy.
Economist David Henderson is among the president's critics. He believes government is part of the problem. He says the federal government has already spent too much money trying to fix the economy.
We've added a few $1 trillion to the federal debt and really not got much to show for it, either in actual valuable output, valuable things the federal government has done, or in jobs created.
Well, the question is, has the president done everything that he possibly can do in light of a totally recalcitrant Republican Congress unwilling to agree to anything?
We reached out to some of the top economists in the nation to get their take on the recovery. Robert Reich is a former U.S. Secretary of Labor and professor at UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. Henderson is a fellow at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University and was on the President's Council of Economic Advisors under Ronald Reagan. Sean Randolph is president and CEO of the Bay Area Economic Institute, a public-private partnership of business, labor, and government. Christopher Thornburg is chief economist for the California State Comptroller and owner of a private economic research firm in Los Angeles. Scott Anderson is senior economist with Wells Fargo, the nation's second-largest bank, and an advisor to the Federal Reserve.
The Bay Area economy right now isn't great, but it's much better than the economy in most of California and in most of the country.
We've got a vicious cycle. Consumers are still laden with debt. Many are underwater, owing more on their homes than their homes are worth. So under these circumstances, consumers are not going to buy. And consumer spending is 70% of the economy.
We continue to talk about the consumer as if the consumer has to step up and start spending more to fix the economy. But that's old school thinking. That's fighting the last war. If you go back to the last couple big recessions, yes, it is true the consumer pulled us out of those downturns. But that's because the consumer was a victim when the shock hit the economy in the first place.
The banking system isn't as strong and able to help support economic growth like it did prior to the Great Recession.
What did the banks do, and what can the banks still do on the road to recovery? We'll look for solutions from the 99%.
How many of you know someone who has lost a home through foreclosure or is close? It's a very painful process.
My neighbor, she had to sell the house because they cannot afford to pay.
Since the recession hit in 2007, millions of homeowners across the country have faced foreclosure. In the Bay Area, Alameda, Contra Costa, Solano, and Santa Clara counties have been hit hardest. Economist Sean Randolph is with the Bay Area Economic Institute.
A lot of this is not going to get fixed until the housing market is stabilized.
Many of those homes were taken back by banks who made loans to people who couldn't afford them. It led to a crisis in the banking industry and a taxpayer bailout. 3 years ago, Congress authorized $700 million to help U.S. banks, insurers, and automakers. They were loaned $432 billion in taxpayer money. That's when Congress passed the Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, to keep those businesses from failing. Much of that money has been paid back, but many people feel the banks still owe taxpayers something in return.
How many of you blame banks for not doing more to help people refinance? Just raise your hands out of curiosity.
The mortgage crisis wouldn't have happened if banks would have kept safe investments.
Hold off on the foreclosures and evictions. You know, let these people pay what you can. Pay what you can, and they'll get back to it. These banks are going to survive. Corporate America is going to survive.
I run a small dollar lending business online. We make small loans so consumers can pay their bills on time. And one of our biggest observations in this down economy, a lot of people are being left behind. The big banks that were too big to fail are now too scared to make loans.
There's just a fundamental lack of loan demand because the economy isn't growing fast enough.
Wells Fargo senior economist Scott Anderson says that much of the belt tightening by banks was created by Congress when it passed another bill, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act. It was signed into law last summer. The bill was passed to reform Wall Street and the banking industry by putting systems in place that would prevent them from making the risky investments that ultimately led to the financial meltdown.
This Dodd-Frank bill was designed to make the financial system safer and make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes of the financial crisis and Great Recession. So it's a little bit of both, supply and demand factors that are holding back overall loan demand, and that's, again, hurting our ability to grow and the ability of monetary policy to support growth.
Some economists, like former Labor Secretary Robert Reich and Hoover Fellow David Henderson, say the Dodd-Frank bill has done little to encourage banks to lend and less to fix questionable investing practices on